see you.
Oh,
Yes.
good. Well, I don't see you, but I'll try again.
Okay, all right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the February AAUW branch meeting. We're going to start out with our guest speaker today rather than the thought for the month because Stephanie's having trouble getting on. So we'll give her time to get caught up with us. So Catherine, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can introduce our speaker for us.
Thank you. Our speaker this morning is Jamelia Harris, who is an AAUW Fund American Fellowship recipient for 2020. And she's going to present an overview of her project, Hidden Roses, Navigating, Resisting, and Reclaiming Geographies of Misogynoir Violence. And I apologize if I didn't pronounce that right, and Jamelia can educate us. Among Black girls at Desert Rose High School. She is a tenured UCLA faculty researcher in the field of education, where she's pursuing her PhD in Black girlhood studies. Jamelia is also a community organizer, and she's worked on a number of campaigns, including Say Her Name. So thank you very much for joining us this morning, Jamelia.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I think I might have just a little bit of a lag on my screen, and so I apologize if I might be slowed down. I was trying to log in from another computer, but it's gonna be fine. I'm gonna go ahead and get started with sharing my screen, and I just want to make sure that you all, oh no, I don't think I can share the screen. If someone can give me a screen sharing right, that would be wonderful.
Let me see what I can do here.
Good. Yeah, but it looks like I probably missed my chance to get my remarks. I guess maybe I'll do it at the end or not at all. I don't know.
Hold on just a minute. Let me take care of Stephanie.
Yeah. Hi.
Turn your sound off for right now. We're going to do the speaker first, and then we'll do your thought for the month second. You see how to turn? Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you. Stephanie, we lost you somehow. I mean, Jamelia, we lost you somehow.
Can you all see me now?
Now we can see
Yeah,
you. There you go. Okay. I'm not sure where to give you the ability to share.
Oh no.
Let me see.
What if she was a co-host? Could she be a
Yes,
co-host?
you have to make me a co-host of the meeting.
Okay, all right. I'll do that right now. Hold on. Okay, I just made you a co-host, so that should allow you to be able to share the screen.
Perfect. Okay. I'm gonna try to get this up.
Does it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
We are here. Here we are. Great. So I'm gonna go into full screen mode to make sure you all can see the presentation. All right, can you all see me and the presentation?
No, all we see is your name.
Can you see the presentation now?
No.
Oh gosh, oh no. How about now?
There we go.
Yes, there you go.
Now I can't see my presentation. Okay, perfect. Well, I think I figured it out. So I'm hoping that now you all can view the home screen, the first slide of my presentation. it's the title slide. So just making sure that everyone's with me before I
Yes.
proceed. Perfect. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I am so honored to have the opportunity to speak with you all here today. I spoke a few months ago with another AAUW chapter, and it was one of the most enriching conversations that I've had in my academic career. And so I'm very much looking forward to the opportunity to engage and present my dissertation research with you all, which is entitled Hidden Roses, Exploring Narratives of Hyper-Punishment and Misogynoir Against Black Girls at a Ghettoized High School. And so before I move forward, I kind of just want to go back and introduce a few terms and concepts. And so when I am referring to punishment, I am talking about social and punitive forms of punishment that students are experiencing in schools. And so that encompasses social forms of punishment such as humiliation, as well as formal punitive practices that would typically fall under the guise of zero tolerance, such as suspensions and expulsions. And when I use the term misogynoir, I am talking about the intersection of anti-Black racism and misogyny. And so it's really looking at the ways that Black girls' interactions are compounded by these dual systems of patriarchy and anti-Black racism. And Ghettoized is looking at the specific context of a neighborhood that is concentrated and characterized by racialized poverty. And so as I introduced before, Jamelia Harris, I'm a PhD candidate. I know I think I was introduced as a faculty member. I'm not a faculty member yet. I'm on the job market, but I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Education at UCLA, where my research primarily explores narratives of Black girlhood within urban school context, but specifically focusing in on the intersection between schools and prisons. And so I, again, want to thank you all for allowing me to be here today. And thank you so much for your generous funding support that has allowed me to conduct this research. So I first want to start out by orienting myself in this study. Why Black girls? Why do I focus on Black girls? The of course, obvious research is that I myself was formerly a Black girl. And so one of my professors, Dr. Tyrone Howard, always says that research is me search. And so this idea that our research is often deeply grounded in our identities and our values and our own lived experiences. And so I bring that positionality of being a Black girl who was raised in a very overly policed neighborhood context and witnessed the impact of over-policing in my own community and high school context, which influenced me to become a community organizer during my undergraduate years at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where I became involved with the #SayHer movement that you all are probably more familiar with, the Black Lives Matter movement, but there's been a rise of this movement called Say Her Name, which has been largely driven by Kimberly Crenshaw and the African American Policy Forum to raise awareness about the lived experiences of Black women and Black girls who are murdered by police officers. And so one of my earliest experiences in doing this work was organizing a fundraiser for Megan Hockaday, who was a Black woman that was killed by police less than 30 minutes away from our campus at UC Santa Barbara in Oxnard, in front of her 3 children. And during that visual, Megan Hockaday's sister stood beside me in front of an audience of less than probably 15 people. And she cried out that the hardest part about losing your sister to police murder is convincing the world that Black women's lives matter too. And so those were words that really impacted me as a Black woman myself, who had witnessed policing in my community, and I knew the own realms of my girlhood did not protect me from police violence in my community. And so that dread led me to conduct my first research study at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, who really pushed me to ask the question, why Black girls, and what do we know about Black girls? And so this work that started out in 2014 eventually evolved into my dissertation project, which currently centers on the experiences, oh gosh, let me go back one step. of Black girls in my hometown, which here I refer to as Desert Rose High School. Desert Rose High School is located in Southern California, and it currently has the highest suspension rate for Black girls in the entire state of California. And so while Black girls represent 30% of the cumulative female student enrollment, we know that Black girls account for 55% of female students who are suspended at a total rate of 19.1%, which is nearly 10 times the state average. And so I really wanted to use this project to ask the question, what was going on in my home community? And I wanted to hear from Black girls themselves about how they were unpacking the racial and gender disparities in their schools, discipline inequities. And so I designed this project called Hidden Roses, which ultimately evolved into an after-school program for Black girls who are chronically punished. And the study, I will show you a little bit about the participants, but included 13 Black girls who were referred to me by the school principal based on their discipline records, as well as their reputations as problem students. And so I called the project the Concrete Rose Project, which was inspired by a poem by Tupac Shakur, who is really talking about the ways that Black people oftentimes who are living in these very hard-pressed, impoverished communities are not provided the proper nurturance to fully bloom in the ways that people who are in more privileged sectors of society are afforded. But they often have to defy what he says as defy nature's laws in order to persist in these communities. And so one of the students, I had asked the students to write a reflection about their thoughts on what the Concrete Roses meant in their own lives. And she wrote a poem called Hidden Roses, which ultimately led to the title of my dissertation. And Momo here, she's a 12th grade Black girl. She says, grown on thorns or sprouted through cement with no water, just sun, hopes, and dreams. The hope of being picked and given the opportunity to properly grow. Removing those thorns placed upon us to thrive in our passion. Roses have a heavenly smell that can't be shaken, a scent that draws light towards us, creating our foundation once we are removed from the stem. And so I had been very inspired to see a young Black girl recently who was selected to present this inauguration poem at the Biden inauguration this past weekend, and a lot of conversation has emerged around that. And I think that my project really sits within that tradition of honoring Black girls' literacies and honoring and uplifting Black girls' voices. And so what I wanted to do with this work was make sure that we are creating space for Black girls to produce their own theories and articulations of their lived experiences in school. So I'm just presenting a bit about the core research questions that I asked in this study. The first research question, which was really the driving focus, was how do Black girls describe and understand their experiences with discipline and punishment in relation to the intersections of race, gender, class, and space/place? And so by space, place, I am intentionally focusing on geography. Second, how are Black girls in their punishment experiences positioned within the social, cultural, and geopolitical context of Desert Rose High School? I'll talk a little bit more about the history of Desert Rose High, but this is a city context that has a very deep history of racial segregation and over-policing that has disproportionately impacted poor Black and brown people. And so I wanted to know how they understood their experiences of punishment in relation to that context. And then lastly, how can Black girls' engagement in our after-school group, the Concrete Rose Project, foster new theoretical considerations about the power domains that drive the relationship between race, gender, poverty, space, and place, and the school-prison nexus. And so just a bit of literature to ground us. I'm sure by now you all have likely heard about this concept of push out. And really, there's been a very recent emergence of literature that is focusing on the distinct experiences of Black girls and how the intersections of race and gender often leads Black girls in schools to be subject to criminalization due to this ongoing history that has contributed to the dehumanization and denigration of Black womanhood. And so this body of literature has made connections between this historical legacy of Black women and Black girls and their subjugation during chattel slavery, and the ways that these kinds of ideas and images that depict Black women as angry, as hypersexual, as more aggressive than white women continue to impact the ways that Black girls are being viewed in our public schools today. And due to this, they're subject to a phenomenon that scholars are calling adultification, which essentially the body of research that is saying that Black girls are being perceived as less innocent and less in need of protection than white girls by educators. And because of this, they're subject to harsher penalties in schools when it comes to punishment, and also in the criminal legal system. And so we're seeing Black girls who are more likely to be subject to harsher juvenile court sentences than white girls, and who are also, in as my study confirmed, more likely to be physically assaulted by police officers because they're perceived as more adult-like. And so we've seen recent cases of Black girls as young as 5 years old being arrested in their classrooms for throwing temper tantrums. We've seen cases of Black girls who have been thrown out of their classroom desks because they refuse to give up their cell phone to a school resource officer. And so we're witnessing this really broad pattern of the criminalization of Black girlhood. And one contribution that my work makes that builds on the work of scholars such as Nikki Jones is looking at how that added dimension of geography affects Black girls' experiences with punishment. And so we know that because Black girls are living in these community contexts that are already overly policed, they are likely to experience more heightened levels of surveillance in their schools and more heightened levels of policing in their communities. And so I'm just going to do a quick overview. My work, as I said before, sits within the body of Black feminist theories, that's specifically looking at theories such as intersectionality, which is coined in the field of critical legal studies by Kimberly Crenshaw, and looks at the ways that identities interact with systems of power. But my work also speaks to the emerging body of theories about Black girlhood, which call into question how that added dimension of age compounds Black girls' experiences in ways that we don't often talk about in theories of Black feminism. And then it also speaks to the body of literature that's looking at the ways that anti-Blackness, which is embedded in the structure and fabric of the United States social institutions, including our public education system, are shaping how Black children and Black girls specifically are educated in schools. And so I'm not going to go too deep into this, but my guiding theoretical framework was matrix of domination theory, which Patricia Hill Collins calls the organizing system of Black female oppression. And so it looks at the ways that power is organized across 4 domains, which she terms as the cultural domain, the disciplinary domain, the structural domain, and the interpersonal domain. And so the cultural domain consists of ideologies and ideas. And so that looks at how racism functions through the ideas that operate in a system. The disciplinary domain looks at the practices that uphold systems of bias and racism. And the structural domain looks at the rules and policies and structures that are really embedding these processes of racial domination in any kind of social institution, while the interpersonal domain is looking at the interactions between people that lead to the subordination of Black women in social institutions. For my methods, I conducted a multi-method qualitative study, which consisted of semi-structured interviews with a purposive sample of staff and Black girls. And so this meant that I intentionally selected staff who were involved with the school discipline process, such as the school principal, educators, and the school's PBIS team, the Positive Behavioral Intervention Support staff. And I also intentionally only selected Black girls based on their prior discipline experiences. And so in total, I had a sample of 20 Black girls, but in the Concrete Rose project, there were 13 girls. And so I also included interviews from staff, but I won't be presenting that data today for the purpose of time. And then I also conducted bi-weekly sister circles with these girls, which is really a kind of family style approach to focus groups, where Black women especially share their own lived experiences with other Black women and Black girls as a way to build out our ideas and build knowledge together. And I used critical ethnography, including classroom shadowing, which consisted of 30 hours of observations. This was kind of disrupted due to COVID, but I was able to get a good number of observations in prior to COVID. And this is just an example of some of the documents that I analyzed for my study. I had the girls do mapping activities. This right here is an educational journey map. And the girls also did daily journal reflections, including this activity, which was where I asked the girls what their roses, thorns, and buds were for that week. And so these items were all analyzed as part of my study. And here I'm just sharing a little bit more about the context of Desert Rose High School. As I said before, it has a deep history of racial segregation, poverty, and anti-Black terrorism. This is a city that as of 1980, there was still very much an active presence of the KKK in their local city. And there have been news reportings of Black children who've been harassed by KKK members en route to school in the city in Southern California as of 1980, 1990. And so it's a city that's out in the high deserts that is still deeply dealing with very explicit and direct forms of racial violence, of white supremacist racial terrorism towards Black people, which is an important context to consider. And 88% of the students in this school are identified as socioeconomically disadvantaged, while 35% identify as Black. Among the educators, 8% of the educators and school leaders identify as Black, and 32% identify as Latinx, and 45% identify as white. And so then I talked a bit about the Concrete Rose Project, and this was the primary site of my data collection. The topics that we discussed in these meetings included punishment, as well as stereotypes, and the girls' meaning makings about how they were defining Black girlhood. And so, as I said before, my recruitment criteria included that these girls were all at least suspended on one or more occasion. Among staff, I conducted snowball sampling based on their involvement with discipline. And so I'm going to jump right into my findings section, and I just want to briefly touch on each of the findings before I go into highlighting some of the data. And so the first finding that I found was ideological misogynoir. And so I want to remind everyone that misogynoir is the intersection of anti-Blackness and misogyny. And so the students in my study were describing how they encountered stereotypes at the intersection of race, gender, class, and place. And most common among these stereotypes consisted of the image of the ghetto Black girl. And so this image, the girls described as being perceived by their educators as having bad grammar or being unintelligent, being perceived as loud and disrespectful, and also being framed as violent. Some of the girls would say that educators assumed that they were fighters and threatening. And because of this impacted their discipline and academic expectations for these students. So their academic expectations of these students were low, while their expectations that these students would misbehave or be on drugs. Several of the girls had experiences of teachers profiling them for and accused them of being on drugs due to these kinds of dominant images of what poor Black girls are framed as in media and popular discourses. And one of the most interesting findings of my studies was that the girls were understanding how these images provided a justification for the use of extra legal force by school security and school police. And so several of the girls described practices where school security were responding to girls with physical force to subdue fights among students and so forth. And the girls were relating this as an experience that they directly correlated with being perceived as threatening. And so the first example of this is a quote from a student named Marie. And so she is describing an experience in her AP English class, which another interesting facet of this is that half of the students in my sample were actually honors and AP students, which is very non-typical of studies that are focused on school discipline because they're typically oriented to students who are considered academically disengaged. But these students were very much high achieving students who were being punished in schools. And so Marie says, teachers view me as ghetto and unentitled. It reminds me of Martin Luther King Jr. Like when he tried to be himself and speak up, they felt like since he's African American, he can't say what he wants to say. So it was like a lack of freedom of speech. It makes me feel like, I said before, unwanted and worthless, because why can't I speak up on what I have to say just because of the color of my skin or where I was born? And what I really wanted to call out in this moment was that she wasn't only associating this experience of being unentitled, which is a direct tie to who is providing citizenship in the classroom to her skin color as a Black person, but she was calling this out as a moment where she was discriminated on because of where she lived as a poor Black girl who is living in the context of a poor ghetto Black community. And so that was one of the interesting things, was that the girls were constantly making connections between their identities and the geographic context in which their identities were situated in. Another finding, Dejanay, who was actually, she was a office assistant, and so she was telling me, based on her observations as an office assistant, how she heard adults talk about Black girls in the office. She says, how they look at Black girls is just how I know. I know that how they look at Black girls just from me hearing them talk is that they look at us as being ghetto, loud, fights. If you got a fight with a Black girl and a white girl or a Hispanic girl, most likely they're going to say that the Black girl started the fight. That's just how they're going to say that's just who they're going to say started the fight. And so Dejanay is making this connection again between how she is being viewed, a concept that W.E.B. Du Bois calls double consciousness, but Black feminist theories call it multiple consciousness, how we understand the ways that we are being viewed by the outside world, and how this affects her experiences of discipline and punishment, but also Black girls' experiences largely in school, that a Black girl would automatically be accused if she was in a fight with a non-Black girl, even if it's a non-Black girl of color, because Black girls are framed as violent and threatening. And also specifically because ghetto Black girls are framed as violent and threatening. This isn't just Black girls who are upper middle class. This is Black girls who are low income, living in the context of a ghetto community, being framed as loud and ghetto. Next, I wanted to uplift one quote that was actually from the school principal, because I know that people are always interested to just confirm that what these girls are saying is actually something that educators are themselves experiencing and expressing. And so a quote from the school principal that reflected a common pattern among educators within the school was that really captured the ways that they pathologize the lives of poor Black girls and their family structure. And so oftentimes when I would talk with educators, they had very specific narratives about the pathologies and deficiencies that existed within the community and family structure of Black girls who were punished, and assumed that these students had navigated histories of sexual violence, histories of parent abuse, histories of family incarceration, and that was often framed as a justification for the school's discipline and inequities was that these students were extremely challenged, and because of that, this kind of notion that being from this kind of neighborhood context was a justification for them to have a suspension rate that exceeded every single other high school in the state of California. And so the principal says that she thinks that girls, especially our Black girls, see a lot of violence and a lot of neglect that leads to like fights in the park or whatever. And then oftentimes there's a lot of homelessness or transiency. And so there was this perception that because these girls were coming from these types of homes that they imagined them to be coming from, that they were reenacting that violence inside of the school. And if we were playing devil's advocate, if this were to be true, which I knew that of the girls who were in the sample of my study, that they all had come from very stable, mostly stable home contexts. There were girls who had experienced the foster care system, but even if that were to be true, for us to say that this is a justification for punishment, rather than for us to use that knowledge that we have about the community as a guiding source of providing resources and mental health services and other wraparound services that these students would likely need in response to experiencing these very traumatic experiences that the principal had perceived existed in their lives, is something that I really want to call into question. Because this is a very common finding that I found not only here with this specific school principal, but in conversations with educators across the state of California in my capacity as a researcher and as an educational consultant. I see this consistently across the board. And so next, I wanted to call out this final theme, quote for the theme, which is when they see us as a threat. And I'm actually in the process of finalizing a paper that is going to be titled When They See Us as a Threat, which really looked at how the girls understood the ways that they are positioned by educators and specifically school police as constantly being viewed as a threat, not only because of their behaviors and actions, but just because of the notion of their Blackness being linked to the image of a threat. And so the students had conceived that this provided an ideological justification for police assaults on Black girls in their campus. And when I asked the girls what was a punishment that they had never, what was a punishment that girls of their race and gender group experienced that no other girls in the school experienced, they consistently named physical force and extra-legal force by police and security as the key punishment that they had experienced, and linked that to the image and idea that Black girls are viewed as stronger or threatening. And so the next theme that I want to highlight is structural misogynoir. And so within this theme, the girls highlighted punitive policies and practices that they had conceptualized as policies that only attack Black girls. And so this included the school's dress code policy, where girls often felt that their bodies were rendered distractions, and girls were often racially profiled and accused of being gang members. There was a policy at their school, and this quote is, as this quote is highlighting, that prohibited girls from wearing red bandanas because of the neighborhood context that the school was situated in. They weren't allowed to wear red bandanas without being accused of being affiliated with a gang. But what was interesting, they couldn't wear red bandanas or the color red, period. So anything that was the color red that didn't have the school's logo on it, they couldn't wear it. But what was interesting was that the school's spirit colors were actually red. And so the girls in this quote are theorizing how they are feeling as though educators and school leaders are developing policies in response to Black girls and Black people in the school. Because how can a school that's color was originally red when it was developed back in the 1950s now become a place where students are not allowed to wear red at all. And so the students were having this moment of really unpacking how that made them feel in the school to have policies that were targeted at them as Black students. Another example was that the girls had identified how being assumed, being profiled in the school had often led them to heightened levels of surveillance among security practices. And so Amberly is talking about this experience of being in the bathroom one day and having a school security guard officer accuse her of smoking marijuana when there were other girls in the bathroom who were non-Black girls who were smoking. And during this experience, she had described how the officer had taken her into a private room and basically strip searched her, had searched under her bra area, searched under her clothes to make sure that she didn't have any kind of marijuana or lighter on her body. And she is also linking this to the ways that Black girls are framed as fighters and having a smart mouth. But what was really interesting about the specific quote was that she gave me this entire story in response to the question, how would you describe your experience as a Black girl at Desert Rose High School? I didn't ask her any further question. This was the quote that this is her response to that question. And so that was the most salient experience for her as a 10th grade student at this high school. And so the final theme that I want to highlight was interactional misogynoir. And so within this theme, the students were describing how their classrooms often operated as a racially hostile place in which the students had regularly experienced very hostile interactions with their educators. The students also described abusive power dynamics with educators, and I use the language abuse very specifically because this was a concept that the students themselves had named. They were describing how educators penalize their grades because of their attitude or very subjective things that were about their general character that led their educator to deduct points from their academic grade, not their citizenship grade, their actual academic grade because of their behavior. And so in this quote, we have a student, we have Miss George, who is one of the teachers who the students were most directly referring to. One of the girls had told me that she often attended after school classes because Miss George would deduct points from her grade. And she felt like it was because Miss George had animosity against her as a Black girl. And in this quote, Miss George is describing her perceptions of this student by saying that she views her as very loud, easily distracted by her cell phones. She has amazing potential, but for some reason she's not tapping into it. And what was especially interesting was that Miss George is describing this Black girl, but she had no idea that this girl had actually been an honors 4.0 student that had recently been admitted to Yale University. And so she's telling me that she's highly capable, amazing potential, but for some reason she's not tapping into her potential in her classroom. And this was, I know that some of you will ask me the race of these people who I'm describing. Most of the educators in this entire school were white educators. And so the two women educators who I've shared were white women who are expressing these views of Black girls. And so I'm actually currently writing a paper around this, of how educators' biases can prevent them from recognizing the academic capabilities and brilliance of Black girls. And so I was very interested in kind of this conversation between Ashley and Miss George. And so I wanted to present a side by side of how the impact of Miss George's practices and interactions with Ashley, how it promoted a hostile classroom environment for Ashley and other Black girls. She says, I think Miss George got something against me because I'm Black. I'm not sure, some type of animosity or whatever. I don't know exactly what her problem is, but I just feel like it's because I'm Black. Well, obviously to me, that's what I feel like. It's because there's no other reason. She'd be deducting points from my grade because she says I got an attitude or whatever. So I go to tutoring for extra credit because I'm not gonna allow her to do stupid stuff like that. And then the very end of this quote, when she is giving me an example of she's telling me that she is associating all of this with Miss George's lack of experience with working with Black children. And she says that in the beginning of the year that Miss George had made a comment that she wasn't used to all of the culturally diverse names that Black students in the classroom has. And so she says, I'm more used to students who are like Jimmy, Jackies, and stuff like that. I'm not used to Marquishas and Darnishas. And she's making a very culturally insensitive and problematic statement to these students, which communicated to them that she had not been comfortable with educating Black children. And so I want to close out with just some concluding thoughts and recommendations, which are really emerging from the girls' narratives themselves. And so my dissertation provides a novel source of the study of future study of Black girl counter spaces like Concrete Rose Project as a methodological approach and site for generating a distinct standpoint on the existing societal and structural inequities that are facing the life worlds of Black girls in schools. And specifically, findings from my dissertation highlight the pervasiveness of anti-Black racism and misogynoir in school discipline, which must be explicitly addressed as we are considering school discipline reform initiatives. And next, it really centers on the ways that school leaders can leverage Black girls' voices as a way to inform the development of policies and practices that are intended to counteract the pervasive role of anti-Black racism in the school context. And this can be done through surveys, focus groups, and other Black girl spaces that provide Black girls ample opportunity to express their perspectives and provides them with tangible leadership opportunities. And lastly, my dissertation really highlights the urgency for educators to develop an intersectional awareness and leverage intersectionality as a practice lens, as a way to really critique the ways that power, oppression, and positionality affect classroom dynamics and create spaces for students to self-define in classroom settings, as well as to create inclusive classroom environments for all students, Black girls and beyond. And so as I conclude my presentation, I always love to share this collective poem that the girls of the Concrete Rose Project wrote together. I asked them one prompt, which is, what is something that you would want your teachers and other adults to know about you as a Black girl in this school that would help them better educate you? And so this is a letter that the girls collectively wrote together. We are more than just ghetto Black girls. You need to know your students, their backgrounds, and where they come from before judging them. Some of us are loud and love to laugh. Some are shy. Some get distracted. But not everyone's the same, and not everyone comes from the same place. So don't assume you know us. There are things in life that can cause Black girls to act in a certain way. We might have an attitude and not express what we're feeling. We are human, and sometimes we do get upset. Be a mentor, leader, or someone to comfort us. Be there when we need you. Ask us why our homework didn't get turned in before you yell at us and assume we have no potential. We try hard in your classes. Even when we don't understand, we always try. Take consideration of what you say because it truly matters and affects us. We are intelligent, beautiful, inspirational, devoted, independent, creative, loving, and too real. We are destined to become doctors, multi-billionaires, entrepreneurs, cosmetologists, artists, and lawyers. We are determined to be greater than what society expects us to be because we are strengthened and empowered by our ancestors, mothers, future children, and ourselves. We are full of purpose and possibilities. We are hidden roses. And thank you so much, everyone, for your time today.
Thanks, Jamelia. That was a wonderful presentation. I've got a few questions here that people have typed in the chat. One of them was, Erica Wilson says, of all the books you mentioned, which would be the one that you would recommend for further study?
Definitely. I think that Push Out is an exceptional book to start with. I'm right by my bookshelf, so let me grab another book. Monique Morris has a book called Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues. And so this book is kind of a follow-up to Push Out, and really pushes educators to think about examples of where work is happening that is benefiting Black girls. And so I think that it's really necessary for us to not only know about the problems that are facing Black girls, but to have examples of schools that are doing, approaching their work with Black girls in effective manners. And so she really gives a lot of examples of schools that are using intersectionality and that are promoting inclusive practices and developing gender responsive programming, but also doing work to abolish relationships between schools and police officers so that more of this humanizing work can be done with Black girls. And so I can put this in the chat box, but I think that I would strongly recommend the Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues by Monique Morris, as well as Push Out as two key starting texts. And Push Out, there's also a documentary. So if you'd rather watch the documentary, I'd recommend that as well for book discussion and any further dialogue.
Yeah, we have a book discussion group that has been focusing in on civil rights and Black rights and Black Lives Matter. And so I think that's why she was really interested in knowing which books you recommend, because they've been reading a lot and wanted to know what that was. Heather Abushanab says, just a quote, she said that teacher was acknowledging her own bias, but she still couldn't see how she was applying it. So she thought that was interesting. And then Nernie Miller wanted to know, how were the educators' comments and responses to their students addressed with the educators? If they were, and if so, what were their responses?
So I shared in the beginning that I'm actually a member of the community that this research took place in. And so I'm deeply connected as an organizer and activist in the community. And so as a follow-up, I've presented on multiple occasions to school leaders and educators within the school community my findings, and I'm also currently working on another study, which is called She Can't Breathe, Black Girls at the Intersection of Say Her Name and COVID-19, which is going to lead to the development of professional development trainings and other resources for educators. And so I mean, it's very difficult to engage in these kinds of conversations and to take ownership of your role in upholding white supremacy, your role in upholding racial biases, your role in upholding systems of anti-Blackness. And so I think that those kinds of conversations are always difficult for anyone who participates in them. But I am very much happy that there is a reception to continue doing the work. And so while I think that there's been a little tension and just acknowledging the kind of complicity of some of these narratives that are shared, especially when we're talking about experiences that these girls are having, which are very much civil rights violations in their school. There's been just kind of a lot of pushback with that, but I think that there is a lot of there is a general reception to continuing work and deepening the partnership. And also this is a school that isn't typically reached out to by university partnerships. We have a lot of connection with schools in Los Angeles, but because the school isn't in one of the areas that's near UCLA and University of Southern California, where a lot of the more community-based research partnerships are focused, this is a school that's often neglected and pushed to the margins. And so I think that there's just a need to really shed light on what was happening at this school. And now there's room to continue to do the work that is necessary and moving forward.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, we really have enjoyed your presentation. We always enjoy the presentations of our scholarship participants, but this one we really have been looking forward to, and we really appreciate you coming and joining with us today. and answering the questions. So thank you for attending, and we appreciate it. And if there's any further questions, Erica says, is there a way that we can help? Our racial justice group is looking to go beyond reading. So is there anything specific that they could do other than just reading and discussing?
Yes, I think that there is constantly a need for people to do further work. What I have personally been looking for is people who can connect me with legal resources for students in the school. I think that while it's important to do this work with the principal, that there is a certain degree of what these girls are describing and experiencing that it just doesn't that conversations just don't do enough at this point. And so when we're talking about girls who are being physically assaulted by school security officers, that is very much a civil rights violation in the school context. And so one of the things that I have been looking for is support with legal resources and just providing them to Black educators and organizers in the community or who are supporting these students' efforts. I also think that organizing in your local communities and connecting with schools to figure out ways that you can provide tangible resources and support is necessary. And by schools, I'm talking about looking for the schools in your community that are serving Black and Brown students that are typically under-resourced, and really figuring out ways that you can materially support their needs right now, especially in the midst of COVID, when these schools are really needing more direct community support because they're struggling to meet students' needs in many ways. And so I think that making those connections with Black and Brown students in your own respective communities is really important work. But as for supporting the girls of my research, they are constantly looking for internship opportunities. They are constantly looking for other kinds of resources around scholarships. A lot of these girls are applying to colleges and are coming from first-generation families and resource-poor communities. And so I'd also appreciate any kind of scholarship information that you all have in order to connect and provide them with those kinds of opportunities. And so I can definitely drop my email into the chat box to just continue this dialogue in any way. But I really just appreciate the opportunity to be able to share this research with you, as it's very personal for me. And I just always take such honor in being able to share these girls' stories.
Thank you. Yes. Make sure that you put your email address in there in the chat. That way they've got it and they can contact you in the future if they need to. Thank you. We really appreciate you coming and talking to us today. You don't have to stay, you don't have to stay for the rest of our meeting. So
hi everyone, take care.
Thanks. Okay. Stephanie, since we weren't able to do you to start off with the thought for the month, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give us our thought for the month right now.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to read my remarks. I'm just more comfortable that way. During this past year of COVID isolation, a bright spot for me has been our racial justice book group. Initially meeting twice a month and now once a month under the thoughtful and steady guidance of Erica Wilson. We've been exploring the history and present manifestations of racism and racial inequities in America, and how racial inequity continues to rend the fabric of our American community. For our first year, we've been reading books and other writings and watching films available on streaming services, focusing on the African American experience. Later this year, we plan to turn our attention to Native American issues. Back in 1970, as I was entering high school in Pasadena, California, Pasadena Unified became one of the first urban districts to integrate its schools through mandatory busing. So throughout high school, I enjoyed the benefits of integrated classrooms and sports teams. By the time I was in law school at UCLA, it was expected and commonplace that the student body included students of all races. Since that time, I've recognized that our progress in race relations and racial equity has moved in fits and starts, with an occasional step backwards for all our steps forwards. But I have firmly believed there was a through line of progress. Fast forward to the present. In the last 4 years, and most especially in the last year, I've been despondent, depressed, and even despairing as we have borne witness to continued acts of police brutality against people of color and watched in horror as white supremacism has taken hold with new ferocity and violence. How can we be sliding so far backwards? Where's the America of inclusion we thought we had become, or at least were steadily becoming? Our readings in the Racial Justice Book Group have been illuminating and energizing. In her book, Caste, C-A-S-T-E, Pulitzer Prize winner Isabel Wilkinson writes, "America is an old house. We can never declare the work over. When you live in an old house, you may not want to go into the basement after a storm to see what the rains have wrought. Choose not to look, however, at your own peril. The owner of an old house knows that whatever you are ignoring will never go away. Whatever is lurking will fester." We in the developed world are like homeowners who inherited a piece of land that is beautiful on the outside, but whose soil is unstable loam and rock, heaving and contracting over generations, cracks patched, but the deeper ruptures waved away for decades, centuries even. Many people may rightly say, I had nothing to do with this, how this all started. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked indigenous people, never owned slaves. And yes, not one of us was here when this house was built, but here we are, the current occupants. We are the heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it. We did not erect the uneven pillars or joists, but they are ours to deal with now. So through our readings in the book group, we've learned the ways in which people of color have all along, through US policies, laws, and enforcement actions, been systematically and intentionally thwarted in their attempts to reach certain rooms of our American house. And one era's inequitable treatment produces effects that carry through for generations. We come to understand that the idea of reparations today for the sins of the past is at least worthy of serious discussion, if not legislative action. Such discussion and possible action would be part of striving to be not just non-racist, but anti-racist, as Ibram Kendi urges us to become in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. It has never been more clear that we cannot stand idly by, assuming someone else will take care of what is lurking in the dark recesses of our American house. Like all of you, I was so proud of our country when we elected the first Black president. I will never forget how I actually beamed from ear to ear as I drove to work, entered my office building, and stepped into the elevator. I smiled extravagantly at everyone I passed. And then, the last 4 years showed me what is lurking in the walls and foundation of our house. We have so much work to do. In our Racial Justice Book Group, after our first year of reading, discussing, and sharing personal reactions and stories, we are now starting to explore how we, both individually and together, can have an impact on our local community and in the country at large. I think for most of us, that is our biggest challenge. How do we take our empathy, concern, and yes, anger, and contribute to measurable permanent improvements in the condition of our collective house? I am committed to finding the activities, involvements, and actions that are a good fit for me, my particular skills, and my temperament. In the meantime, I'm grateful to the women in the Racial Justice Book Group for their perspectives, insights, and compassion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was great. Went right along with what our speaker today. I just wish we had you right at the beginning, but that was great. Thanks. We really appreciate it. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Catherine Brown, because Catherine is going to give us an update on the STEM project for this year, and they really have been moving forward on this. So Catherine, it's up to you right now. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Sue. And I've invited some of the committee members for this year who've been very active to be on the screen now. So if the people who are attending as committee members, we have Marilyn Shankar, who is this year's treasurer and also is responsible for sending out the solicitation letters and the thank you letters to all our donors. Marilyn, if you could wave. Hi. We have Kay Dauberton, who is our school liaison. And we have Cindy Perkins, who is our speaker coordinator, who's been doing a lot of work to acquire and the feeding and coddling and appreciation of our volunteer speakers in the community, who those of you who are familiar with the STEM conference know that we have over 30 community women who are working women who come in and donate their time to the STEM conference. And finally, we have Heather Abushinab, working on the STEM committee this year and a past chair of the STEM committee, as are Kay and Marilyn. And Heather's going to start with a little history of the STEM conference.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I am always happy to talk about STEM, but today is also the day that AAUW reveals our named gift honorees, an award that is given to a select few to honor their outstanding service to AAUW over a period of at least 5 years. Our first AAUW named gift honoree this morning is a dedicated member of our STEM team and an avid bridge player. In fact, I remember she once told me that she joined AAUW for bridge. Life itself has some similarities to bridge, and let's see how these bridge terms apply to this honoree. In bridge, you have a partner, the player with whom one is paired during a game. Our honoree had a life partner whom she married in 1971. His name was George, but everyone called him Joe. And their partnership lasted almost 40 years, longer than any bridge partnership I know of. Bridge is a card game, which starts out with bidding, which is a complicated means of communicating to reach an agreed upon contract for the game. Our honoree started her game of life in Glendale, California, where she was raised by her parents and taught to play bridge. This early life led her to work as a YMCA camp counselor, and just like bridge, communicating with teens and preteens also often needs its own communication system. In bridge, the cards have 4 suits. Our honoree has a heart of gold, a character as tough as diamonds, and no fear of hard work, whether it requires a spade, a club, or just her own ingenuity. She attended CSU Fresno, where she got a degree in Parks and Rec. Her first job out of college was as a social worker for pregnant minors. She then transitioned to a career in the Youth Authority, now called the Division of Juvenile Justice. I think we're seeing a youth theme in this individual's life. She worked as a parole agent within a program preparing parolees for a successful return to home. And this included a caseload in South Central LA during the Watts riots. Did I say she was tough as diamonds? She was promoted to parole supervisor and eventually became the superintendent of Mount Bullion Youth Conservation Camp in Mariposa, California, near Yosemite. There, she and her family lived at the camp along with around 120 juvenile offenders who were learning firefighting skills as part of their rehabilitation program. In bridge, trump is the suit named in the final bridge bid. And when played, a trump suit card wins over a non-trump card. Our honorary's career accomplishments were only trumped by her volunteer efforts, which generally centered on improving the lives of people, often women or girls in her community. While living in Mariposa, she helped found the Mountain Crisis Center, a place where local battered women could find shelter. That endeavor continues to provide sanctuary to women and has broadened its fight against domestic violence with prevention and education programs. In Redlands, she has been extensively involved in the Redlands Meals on Wheels program, serving on the board and running their client relations and all the scheduling and coordination for the program. According to many people I spoke with, it would be impossible for this program to run if it was not for this individual. The goal in Bridge is to earn 100 or even more points called a game. So a new game began for this awardee after her retirement. Her son, who I noticed is in our audience today, settled in Redlands and needed some childcare help. So she and Joe came in a motorhome for extended visits and finally settled permanently in Redlands. That was in 2005. Sadly, in 2010, Joe died. This must have felt like a partial game, or as it's referred to in Bridge, a leg being cut off. Shortly after this, our awardee found her way to our branch. Time again for another new game. A rubber is a bonus awarded for winning 2 out of 2 or 2 out of 3 games in Bridge. AAUW won more than a rubber, certainly a huge bonus when our honoree joined us in 2011. Although she claims she joined for the Bridge, it did not take her long to find a way to again advance the lives of women and girls in our community through our AAUW STEM initiatives. She paired with Kathy Presnell Best to help with conference speakers and built a wonderful rapport with them. Her organizational skills are invaluable. Kathy, and then later Catherine Brown, were able to focus on recruiting new speakers while our honoree handled all the coordination and communication needed for this conference. In recent years, this honoree has taken on speaker coordination for the Pass area as well as the Redlands Conference. I had the pleasure of working with her while I was the chair of Redlands STEM. And whenever I had a new idea, I could always count on this honorary to respond, well, we could do that. And then she would proceed to make sure I understood the logistics that would be involved and required to implement my new wonderful idea. She was always enthusiastic about making the conference better and never shied away from extra work that would pay off in a better product. But she was also a great help to me in making sure that the payoff was worth the extra work. This year has been particularly challenging for STEM. Her technical expertise is the linchpin without which it is hard to imagine that we would be ready to launch the coming 2021 AAUW STEM conference. Honors are extra points that are awarded in Bridge when the declarer has the top cards in the contract suit. All right, for her dedication to our STEM program and her lifelong dedication to advancing women through advocacy, education, and philanthropy, I am so pleased to honor Cindy Perkins as our AAUW named gift honoree for 2021.
I'm astounded. Oh, thank you so much. What an honor. I knew you must have talked to somebody to get all that information. Oh my Lord. I'm really honored to be working with this group. It's been a real pleasure all these years. So thank you very much for the honor.
I had a lot of fun talking to your son and learning a lot about your past that I didn't know about. I have always known you are an excellent bridge player. You are always part of the team to beat whenever we play. And it was a lot of fun to be able to put together the presentation. So
thank you.
Happy to be part of the honoring you, Cindy.
I'll get you back, Ted, if you hear me in the audience.
We really
I hope I got most of that right.
Yeah, there he
I
goes.
think I got most of it right. Congratulations, Mom.
We're proud of you,
We're so
Nana.
proud of you.
Thank
Love
you,
you.
guys.
Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that Ted, you and your family could be here with her today as she gets this wonderful award. Catherine, I'm going to turn it back over to you now.
Okay, so as many of you know, but not everyone, we have every year the privilege of naming 3 named gift honorees. And this year we're going to name 2 today because our 3rd honoree couldn't be here and she'll be here in March. but our second honoree is going to be presented by Ann Leonard.
Thanks, Catherine. So this recipient was born in Ponca City in north central Oklahoma. She graduated from Ponca City High School and went on to graduate from Phillips University in Oklahoma. She continued with graduate work at the University of Oklahoma. She began her teaching career in Pauls Valley in the southern area of the state. Her brother was also a teacher and lived with his family in Corona, California. She was interested in moving to California as well and applied to school districts around the area. As chance would have it, Redlands had an opening in the social studies department. She flew out for an interview and was promptly hired with the best of references. Pauls Valley was sad to see her go, but she was Redlands' gain. She was a delegate from Oklahoma to the Democratic National Convention in 1984 when Geraldine Ferrero was nominated for vice president. That was just a little aside. She began teaching at Redlands High School in January 1987, teaching U.S. history, her specialty. And eventually, she also taught advanced placement U.S. history. When Redlands East Valley High School opened in September of 1998, she was in the initial group of teachers to open the new high school. She was a well-respected teacher for 10 years at Rev, being chosen by her peers and the administration to be the social studies department chairperson. She was hardworking with attention to detail. Her dedication to her students, especially the AP students, was evident in the high scores her students received on their exams. Her organization skills were demonstrated in the classroom and in her department meetings. Rev has a diverse population, and she showed an appreciation for all types of learners and all students. She was extremely thorough in her presentations and was willing to help new teachers in her department. After retiring in 2007, she was a popular substitute teacher, especially in AP US history classes, because those students valued her expertise in their field of study and benefited from her insight into the subject material, preparing them for their AP exam. Since her retirement in 2007, she's taken leadership positions in her church, Cal RTA, and the Redlands Educational Scholarship Foundation and AAUW. She became co-chair of the Legislative Committee for the Redlands, California Retired Teachers Association, where she keeps members up to date on pending legislation related to retirees and especially teacher retirees. She stays well informed on pertinent issues, and her peers respect her commitment to keeping them knowledgeable on these important topics. The Redlands Community Scholarship Foundation was thrilled when she accepted the invitation to join the board several years ago. She learned how to evaluate the scholarship applications and spent a week volunteering to score over 200 applications each year. She served as president of the board and did an excellent job keeping the board informed about some legal issues and district negotiations. In 2012, she rejoined AAUW. She has led one of the two Great Decisions discussion groups for 2 years. She has been a bunco hostess often. She has volunteered annually as a docent at the YMCA home tour. She has served on the high school scholarship committee and been a STEM host at the Redlands Conference for several years. She served 2 years as secretary, was on the nominating committee, and was president-elect, and now is an outstanding president managing Zoom meetings and motivating members to stay involved. This recipient has been supportive and generous with her extended family of nieces and nephews and their children. Now a niece from Mexico is part of her household, learning about life in the United States and attending virtual school at Redlands High School. Her skills include being a strong team member, communicating effectively, having a strong work ethic, showing initiative, demonstrating motivation, and handling responsibilities. She has a calm and clear head. She likes to be prepared and plan ahead. She is a dedicated volunteer that follows through with her commitments and is elected to leadership roles. She is respected for her loyalty, her legacy of teaching scores of students, as well as her contributions to her community, are to be greatly admired. Congratulations to my friend, Sue Wallace, for being an AAUW named gift honoree.
Wow, this is a surprise. Oh, thank you so much. Catherine, you and Ann did a wonderful job of keeping this all a secret. So I had no idea this was coming. So thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed working with AAUW and hope to continue to do so for much longer in the future. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Catherine, is there anything else you want to add to all of this?
Well, we really appreciate both you and Cindy. And I just wanted to point out that something just arrived at Cindy's house. I don't want to spoil the surprise for you, Sue, but I think something will be arriving at your house very soon as well. So we're really sorry that we can't be there in person and give you a big hug, but we're going to let the flowers talk too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. They look gorgeous, Cindy. I love them.
beautiful.
Yes, I'll be looking forward to getting mine too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And there's a pin too.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
I'm looking forward to this. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for everything. Heather, you guys did a great job of this. All right, Catherine, that's it for your part today. As far as the presentations are concerned, we have
Yes.
one more to give next month when that honoree is going to be available to attend our
right.
meeting. Yeah. All right. We need to move on with our business session of the meeting. And the first thing we need to do is let me, I was going to share my screen, but oh, there it is. We need to recognize both February and let me bring the slideshow up here. Okay, there we go. I hope everybody can see this. This is birthday celebrations for both February and August, because we do both groups for the summer months that we normally, whoops. There we go. So we have February birthdays are Rosemary Conway, Kay Dauberton, Judy Elder, Jenny Evans, Janice Jacobson, Cheryl Jordan, Lois Knutson, Kathleen Presnell, Renee Reiswick, Nelda Stuck, and Denise Westcott. And the August birthdays are Heather Abushanam, Gail Anderson, Susie Brainerd, Sid Breyer, Rosalind Dunn, Joyce Heitmeyer, Martha Lehman, Ann Marshall, Betty Meltzer, Tony Momberger, Kathy Odegaard, Jane Roberts, Ann Sandell, Susan Shodal, and Susan Willis. So happy birthday to all of you. All right. Now we need to go on with the business session of our meeting, and we need to, whoops. We need to look at the minutes here. I sent the minutes out to